Welcome explorers. Today, dive into the thrilling TTP narration of Hunting with Predators by Banancake, a 25-part fan-made saga from the Nature of Predators series by Spacepaladin15 on r/HFY.
Memory transcription subject, Vikri, Venlil volunteer crewman of UNS Cardinal. Date, standardized human time, October 28, 2136, 11 days after the Battle of Earth. Kinetics were something most species had left behind entirely. They were primitive by galactic standards. They were loud, dangerous to handle, and generally unwieldy for us. None of that mattered to the humans. They never left the technology behind. Instead, they perfected it. Their stronger, sturdier bodies were more capable of handling the immense recoil than most other races. Their sharp eyes and dexterous hands removed the need for advanced targeting systems. They were the targeting system. It never dawned on me how much they'd mastered marksmanship until Grant pulled the trigger. The pressure wave kicked up a thin cloud of snow and vapor in front of us. The tremendous sound echoed off the hills around us again and again. The recoil threatened to knock me off of Grant entirely. All of that chaos just to send a few grams of lead toward a target. It was ridiculous. Its effectiveness, however, was unquestionable. I watched as the projectile hit the bison right at the base of the skull, severing the spine and probably destroying much of its brain. The creature died before the bullet even hit the ground on the other side. Its corpse, still carrying the immense momentum of its attempted escape, collapsed to the ground and skidded to a stop on the banks of the stream. Smoke escaped the action of the weapon as the bolt locked back. Empty. The loud crack startled most of the wolves for a moment, but one seemed utterly unaffected. There was a terrifying, vicious rage in its eyes as it leapt toward Reese. Making a break for the carcass as planned was no longer an option. I clung tight to Grant's back as we prepared for round two. Reese was more than ready for the enraged predator. All he had to do was step forward, and the spear did the rest. I heard the sickening sound of tearing flesh as the wolf impaled itself on the end of the spear, dangling several feet off the ground. Despite the fatal wound, the wolf still bit and clawed at Reese in a blinding rage, desperately trying to inflict any damage it could. Reese growled as he swung the predator into a nearby tree, knocking it off the end of the spear. The creature writhed on the ground, making horrible screeching sounds as its blood spilled onto the snow. It was horrific to watch. The rest of the pack must have thought so too. They hesitated, pacing back and forth in front of us as Reese stood ready. Two stalked closer while one stayed behind. The beasts were exhausted. More so than the humans. They were panting rapidly. Their mouths were opened wide, revealing their vicious teeth while their tongues dangled in the freezing winds, dripping with foamy saliva. They were on the verge of starvation, yet they seemed uninterested in the fresh bison lying just down the hill. Were they after us out of pure rage? Revenge? Grant tapped me on the arm. Time for you to get down. Stay behind us. I'll pick you up when we start running again, yeah? I nervously hopped down and stood close to Tenga, who tossed his spear to Grant. Grant caught it in a reverse grip and began tossing it into the air just a few inches, feeling for the center of balance. He stood next to Reese, ready to throw. Two of the remaining three approached, barking and snarling. Standing next to Tenga, I could hear Querex's heavy breathing as they closed in. He was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. The lieutenant was periodically reminding him, "Don't run. Stay where you are." A colossal hand rested on both our heads as we hid behind the towering predator. Tenga looked awful. His breathing was labored, and I could hear wheezing coming from his chest. While the standoff continued, we slowly inched down the hill, getting closer to the bison carcass and creating some distance. One of the wolves began to charge forward. That was the only invitation Grant required. With a guttural shout, he hurled the spear with primal ferocity. I swore I could hear the sharpened branch whistling as it sliced through the air. The simple yet reliable weapon hit the wolf on the left directly in the face. The wood at the tip splintered as the rest of the shaft deflected off of the cannon's head. I wasn't sure if the crack I'd heard was the tip of the spear shattering or the creature's skull splitting open. Judging by its reaction, it may have been the latter. Like the first attacker, it writhed around on the ground, screeching and yelping. There was a horrid gash running along the left side of its face. Its eye on that side was missing entirely, replaced by mangled flesh. I was astonished at the amount of damage caused by a weapon that took the humans barely 20 minutes to create. It got up and ran away, falling over several times as it disappeared into the trees. I doubted it would get far. At the same time, the second canid went after Reese, going low rather than high. It latched onto the human's leg halfway up the calf, but its teeth struggled to pierce Reese's thick boots. Reese jabbed at the creature with his spear, but it continued gnawing at the human's leg, trying to wrestle him to the ground. It succeeded. Reese toppled backward, and the canid pounced on top of him. Before it could sink its teeth into Reese's neck, Grant grabbed his rifle by the base of the barrel and slammed the stock over the beast's head like a club. With a yelp, the wolf rolled off of Reese, and the human was on top of it instantly. Reese forced the spear's shaft into the predator's mouth horizontally and pinned it to the ground. The wolf writhed as the two thrashed about in the snow. Finally, Reese released a raspy roar that echoed in the distance as he violently twisted the spear to one side. The struggle ceased with a faint pop. The canid lay motionless. Reese stood up, panting heavily. Grant steadied him as they both watched the last remaining wolf. This one was smaller than the rest and didn't show any apparent symptoms. There was no saliva dripping from its mouth. It lacked that signature crazed rage in its eyes that I'd seen from the others. It even looked better fed than the rest. Grant raised the rifle and shouted at the creature, feinting a charge. It ran away, tail between its legs. Grant hurried over and picked up the broken spear before running back to me. "Let's go." Grant helped me onto his back again, and we all hurried down the slope toward the carcass. We managed to get out of that one seemingly unscathed. We were fortunate that Querec spotted them. I doubted Tenga could protect us from 4 wolves alone. Part of me felt bad for the creatures, which is something I never thought I'd feel for a wild predator. That wasn't like the first time with the gun. They suffered a lot more. At the same time, however, it seemed the humans were cutting their suffering short. They were starving themselves. I couldn't imagine what else a virus like that could do. It made me even more afraid for Tenga. As we approached the carcass, I gawked as I realized the creature was around my height, lying on its side. I couldn't imagine how terrified I'd be if this thing charged at me like it did with Grant and Reese. Reese wasted no time. He drew his knife and cut into the belly of the creature. I gagged and turned away. Some warning would have been nice. Sorry. But this is the cold reality of it. This was once an animal. Now it's food. He made a long incision along the underside of the bison and began cutting away its hide to get to the flesh beneath. A good piece of sirloin from this beast should feed us for a few days. Sirloin. Meat from this area here. He patted the creature on the back behind the rib cage. He'd already begun slicing off a long strip of flesh. Damn it. Why did I look? As Reese butchered the bison, I heard Tenga whisper, "Look who's back." I walked up next to him to see a lone wolf standing in the field. The same one that ran away. It kept its distance and seemed to watch us curiously. The humans would grunt and lunge at it, and it would nervously back off before turning around and approaching again. Eventually, it sat down, licking its chops. It was hungry. "I think she wants that bison." Grant chuckled. His demeanor was entirely different from when he was fighting them. He smiled as he watched the predator lie down in the snow, eyeing the carcass. "She can have all the bison she wants when I'm done here," Reese grunted. I didn't dare turn around again, but I heard something thud onto the snow shortly after. Tenga knelt down, studying the canid. "She doesn't seem sick." "Yeah, not yet," Grant replied. "Well, if she got it around the same time as the rest of the pack, then she should be showing at least some symptoms. I don't see any bite marks on her. Maybe she's an outsider. Joined the pack recently. Maybe, she'd still have to be extremely lucky not to have gotten it some way or another." Well, there's your name. Tenga scoffed. Adorable. Querek and I hid behind Tenga while they observed the canid. I knew we'd probably be lunch for this thing if the humans weren't there. Yet the humans seemed to treat it as if it were a lost child. A dangerous lost child. It did seem oddly innocent. It displayed much more intelligence and personality than I would have otherwise given the wolves credit for. Reese spoke up from behind us. She won't last long out here by herself. She's lucky to be alive to begin with, considering how small she is. He walked up next to us with a tarp wrapped up in paracord. He set it on the ground and pulled out a small chunk of bloody flesh, and began to slowly approach the canid. The wolf watched him cautiously, tracking his every move. Reese got within a few meters before the creature let out a soft growl. It looked up at Reese with wide, fearful eyes. Reese stopped where he was and gently tossed the meat to the ground in front of him, halfway between him and the hungry predator. He took a step back and squatted down. The wolf stood up and began to approach. It held its head low as it sniffed the air rapidly. It gingerly grabbed the piece of flesh with its teeth and hurried back to its original place before lying on its stomach and devouring it, still watching Reese. Reese chuckled as he slowly got up and walked back to us. "Can we keep her?" he asked, impersonating a human child. The others laughed, which seemed to startle the wolf for a moment. Grant sighed, "She'll probably follow us once she's done with this carcass. She's a pack predator, after all." "And you're just okay with that?" Querek asked, puzzled. I had my own reservations about the idea, but Querek had seen what it's like to be prey to this animal firsthand. If anyone were averse to the idea, it was him. "These things have hunted us twice now, and you're just gonna let this one follow us? You killed or maimed the others, why is this one any different?" Tenga turned to him. "So we should just finish the job? Drive a spear through a frightened animal here and now for no other reason than it could hurt us?" The others were different because they were sick, Querek. They were literally losing their minds. He spoke with a stern tone. He sounded like a disappointed father. "Sound a little similar to what happened last week." Querek lowered his head, shivering as he huddled into the blanket. I didn't mean it like that. His ears pressed to the top of his head. Tenga sighed and knelt down. "I know you're scared of them. No one can blame you for that, but you were scared of us at one point too. She's just another animal, Querek. Unless she starts showing signs of aggression, we'll let her be." Querek nodded, still cautiously watching the creature. Tenga turned to Reese. "Got everything we need?" "Yes, sir." Reese picked up the bag and tossed it over his shoulder. "If it doesn't go bad, this will feed us for days." "All right. Let's set up by the stream down that way. We'll let our friend here get a bite." They looked back over to the wolf, who had finished eating the chunk of flesh seconds after she snatched it up. She licked her chops once again as she patiently waited for an opportunity to get to the carcass. Finally, the cookware we salvaged from the pods could serve its purpose. Reese set up a wire stand over the fire and placed a thin pan on top. I watched as he put 3 strips of flesh on the surface. The fat and muscle sizzled as it began burning. The humans called it steak. While it cooked, we removed Querek's bandages to inspect his wounds. As Grant removed the final layer, I heard him mutter, "Shit." "Yeah." I concurred. "How do Venlil fight infections?" "Our body temperature increases, more so than humans. That could explain why he feels so cold. That might not have been simple blood loss." I took a closer look. The cauterized wound was coated in a clear, pasty liquid. The fur around the site was thinning, exposing the skin beneath. "We need to get the hell out of here," Grant muttered. He was visibly worried. "We will," Querek said, shivering. "We just have to keep moving. I should be good to walk on my own from here." Grant nodded as he began wrapping the wounds in fresh bandages. We did the same for Tenga. His injuries were healing much faster than Querek's, but his entire forearm was swelling. His skin felt hot to the touch as I wrapped it back up. I pressed a paw to his head. He was burning up. The giant predator turned to me with a tired expression. "I'm fine," he whispered. I sat down next to him. "Of course you're not." The predator chuckled as he rested his bandaged arm over my shoulder. "This steak oughta get me back up and running a bit." He cleared his throat. "Are you sure you want to be around for this? I watched you kill it, I think I can bear to watch you eat it." "Fair enough." Reese approached, holding a piece of cardboard that he'd put the steaks on. He handed it to Tenga. "I'm a bit short on cutlery, so you'll have to use your knife." Tenga took the improvised plate. "Thanks, Reese." Reese nodded and took his seat on the other side of the fire. "Moment of truth, boys. Dig in." Tenga sliced off a small piece of the browned flesh. The interior was also browned aside from a thin strip of pink in the middle. He placed the meat into his mouth and slid it off the knife with his teeth. He chewed for a moment. The humans all looked at each other. Grant smiled. All three of them began laughing at the same time. "Easily the best steak I've ever had," Tenga said, raising the plate slightly. "Agreed," Grant chuckled. Reese soaked up the praise with exaggerated body language, waving his arms toward himself as he chewed on the steak. "Yeah, come on, keep it comin', dot." "Though, to be fair, we were kind of starving," Tenga interrupted. Reese held out a hand. "We ain't gotta mention that. You already said it was the best steak you ever had." The other two laughed. All right, Tenga said as he took another bite. It was so strange. A predator putting flesh between his teeth while I sat next to him. The sound of his teeth tearing the meat apart made my stomach twist, though not nearly as much as I would have expected. Tenga set the plate down for a moment. "So, did you learn anything?" "I don't know. I think so. I thought of hunters as an unstoppable force. The ones spreading fear, not the ones who were afraid. That's not the case." I looked into the fire. The whole scene was so similar to when I first had the idea to go with them. "Did you feel angry when you jammed your fist down that wolf's throat?" I looked up at Tenga, who was also gazing into the fire. He thought for a moment. "No. Not in the way I might get angry at a person. People know better. Animals don't. Honestly, I don't know that I could describe what I felt in that moment. I don't think I really felt anything. I just knew I had to protect my friends at all costs. That wolf needed to die, plain and simple. There was no hatred. No anger. Just desperation. Fear. Similar story with the bison. We'd never have done that if there were any other options." I thought for a moment. What Tenga described wasn't so different from what I felt on the Cardinal. That numbness. The overwhelming fear. What was unfamiliar to me was what drove them to push through that. To act instead of freeze and panic. I wasn't sure what I thought I'd see once it finally happened. Part of me expected the humans to turn into beasts that I'd barely recognize, driven only by their hunger. I thought I'd be afraid of watching them hunt, and I was. I was afraid for them. I breathed deeply and looked up at Tenga. Compassion glowed behind his hazel eyes. The only sapient predator I've seen is a hateful one. You guys are different. I think I can confirm that much. Tenga smiled and rubbed my head. Glad to hear it.